Hello, and welcome back to our show. Although composers often put long, lonely hours into their compositions, we must not assume that they are working on their art in the sense of careful planning and dutiful execution. On close observation, ISFPs prove to be just as impulsive as the other artisans. Indeed, they covet their impulses and see them as the center of their lives. They do not wait to act or to consider their moves, for to wait is to see their impulse wither and die. Rather, they live intensely in the here and now, and as gracefully as possible with little or no planning or preparation. Submergence in their artistry is not preparation for something later, and neither is it artful play, such as crafters engage in with their tools. Composers are seized by the act of artistic composition, as if caught up in a whirlwind. The act is their master, not the reverse, and in a sense, the doing is elicited by the action itself. ISFPs paint or sculpt, they dance or skate, they write melodies or recipes or whatever simply because they must. They climb the mountain because it is there. And I could probably come up with all kinds of examples of that sort of thing. And it's funny because, like I've said before, for the first, 30 years or so of my life, I really didn't do a whole lot of self-examination. I did to a point, but it was always very much based on just whatever my current feelings were. I would say within the moment I'm in, where am I? What do I need to do? What's life about? That sort of thing. And it wasn't that I didn't have memories of my past, because of course I did, but I didn't just, I could talk about an experience I had, and I would talk about, okay, these are the good and bad things of the experience, but I wouldn't, analyze my past behavior. I wouldn't, try to say, okay, well, what happened in this instance? And I guess on the rare occasion that I did, it was almost always negative. It was always well, how could I have done this differently so that things didn't end up so screwed up, And when I did that, it was usually still pretty recent, certain things would just be what was really preoccupying my thoughts, and that's what I would examine, My senior year of high school, I became really infatuated with this one girl, and I spent a lot of the year pretty much with her dominating my thoughts all the time. And so the actions that I took in trying to pursue her and failing miserably, I would sort of go back and review those things over and over again for what I should have done instead of what I actually did do. But I say all that because my kind of basic mode of operation, again, was not to spend time examining my past behavior for my motives, So this stuff about looking at why somebody of my particular personality does something, is a relatively new thing to me. But now that I've been reading about it for, more than a year, I can see these things much more clearly, and some of them are pretty funny because, I think about how many hours I spent on a particular project that I never finished, and, looking back on it, I think, there's, I guess, a lot of people who might have a tendency to think of that as a failure because I didn't finish a particular thing. But, and I'll occasionally have those thoughts because there's something where, if I really had finished it, might have resulted in some kind of reward of some sort in terms of whether it was, a career type thing or something that that amounted to money or something fun or something convenient for me, that sort of stuff. All of that stuff is possible, but I guess even then, I have not really spent a whole lot of time worrying about that. In terms of, there's a part, I guess, earlier in the chapter about the Artisan Temperament in general that says, we don't grouse about our errors. I think that's what it said. And again, sometimes I have, but it's easy for me to move on from some things, I guess. And so when I think about something like coming up with radio ideas, and saying, well, if I had a radio station of this particular format, how would I do the format? And I don't just stop with like a few ideas in my head. I don't say things like, well, I'd play more songs from the 80s, or I would, have less DJ chatter, or what, these kind of things. At a very basic level, anybody who's listened to the radio has probably had opinions about it, has probably said, well, if I had my own radio station, I'd do it this way. But they don't go very far with it. Whereas I have had, especially once I had a computer for me to type on and save all kinds of different files, but even before then, when I was just writing by hand, even the example, the evidence is probably even more striking there, where I have like notebooks filled up with a ton of things like song logs. And when I say song logs, I mean like several days worth of 24 hours of every single song that the radio station would play. Okay, and again, this was never my job. The time that I spent actually, with a show on a radio station, it was a volunteer thing, and this was, before and after that. This was just a fictional thing in terms of, it wasn't something I was getting paid to do. It wasn't something that I was anywhere close to having a chance to actually implement. It was just, this is the impulse that strikes me as these ideas. And what I have to do is write them down or type them down, because that's what I feel like doing now. And that's the thing, is that I can look back at folders on my computer from stuff over the past 8 years and see all kinds of started projects like that I never finished. One of things, in addition to just radio in general, one thing that I really got into starting around the time I was 12 or 13 was countdown shows and music charts. The weekly charts that rank the most played songs of the week, or the biggest selling, whatever the criteria is used. And once I started really getting into that, of course I had to make my own charts. And so I started doing that, and initially very haphazardly in terms of the way I did them. But as I went on, I tried to make them more and more like real charts, and I had, of course, ideas about if it was an actual show, how would it be presented, and what would it sound like. And that wasn't something that I did just for a few days or something. That's kind of a hobby or an interest that continued for a long time, but with big gaps in it, because there were periods where I just got into something else and I didn't care about that. But I've got things in my folders where I can see that I decided I was going to create a new chart, because there's a whole lot of different radio formats now that radio sort of fragmented and really split. Whereas there used to be a whole lot more variety on one particular station in a current format, they made it very niche oriented, where there's not as much variety on one station. And then, of course, some of that is a negative from my standpoint, but then the positive aspect of it was that it fueled the fire of ideas of formats that hadn't been tried before. Ideas for, okay, well, how can I kind of take one of these things and tweak it in a way that makes it new, that makes it more, something that's my idea. And, one thing I noticed is in most forms of music, whether it be rock or R&B or pop, they had sort of like the hard version and the soft version. It wasn't always as cut and dried as that, but you had like the pop chart, and then you had the adult contemporary chart, which was kind of like the soft version of the pop chart, and then you had like rock, and then you have softer rock or adult rock, whatever they call it, and then you have like R&B, but you had the soft R&B because the regular R&B chart would include rap and hip hop and the stuff that was a little more harder edge, whereas you had the soft R&B or adult R&B that was that tended to play more of like the ballad type songs or the soul music, some smooth jazz, that sort of thing, So there were these sort of alternate versions of, this, even like alternative rock even had, like the softer version, you could listen to an alternative station that would play something like, I'm going to date myself here because I don't know the new band's names, but something like Soundgarden or Rage Against the Machine or whatever that was a little more hard edge. But then you'd have alternative stations that stuck to more things like U2 or the Cranberries or stuff that was Sarah McLachlan, stuff that was not as hard. But the thing I noticed is that country music didn't really have this. I mean, there was pretty much in just one country format. Now there were classic country stations that would play like older songs, and sometimes there'd be little offshoots like here in Texas there'd be stations that called themselves Texas Country, and they played a lot more like Texas artists instead of just exclusively the Nashville stuff. And I had even heard of a few country stations that called themselves soft country, but there wasn't like a real format for that. There wasn't a chart for it. So I decided to, come up with one. So I created, what I did was I took the real radio and records radio station playlists that were posted on the website, and since I couldn't find enough stations that actually played that format, what I did was basically take those playlists and remove the songs that I didn't think were soft enough, quote unquote, to fit into my format, and then I compiled a chart based on that. And let me tell you that was a lot of work. It doesn't sound like that much work until you actually try to do it, and you actually do everything manually, because that's the thing is I didn't have like some sort of fancy computer program to do all this stuff for me. I had to enter, I used computer programs, like word processing, a database or a spreadsheet, that sort of thing. But the only thing I used that for in terms of doing something for me was just calculating, ordering the totals, after I entered everything and had the points and stuff added up, and then I would use it to sort so that it would rank the songs by the points so that I had the chart. But all of the actual like information compiling and the data entry of all this stuff I did myself. So it shouldn't be that surprising when I say that I did a grand total of like 3 charts before I gave up on that idea. And again, but for the time I was doing it, that was the most important thing. I don't even remember exactly what year that was. It might have been 04 or 03, somewhere in there. But for those like 3 weeks, it's not like my life didn't go on and I didn't do other things. But when I had any time that wasn't spent on work or, other activities, that's what I did. And I know there's a lot of people that would look at that and they'd, could observe me over that period of time and be like, why did he do this? It served no purpose. He didn't accomplish anything. He didn't stay with it. Nothing came of it. Wasn't this a complete waste of time? And the thing was, no, it wasn't, because during the time I was doing it, it was fun. It was what I wanted to do. It was what I was, consumed by. That whole thing about being caught up in a whirlwind, that's what it's like. And it's almost as if the other aspects, those other things you think about, or the other things in life, can't break through that. It's almost like it's sort of like a shell, or this thing that's just impenetrable where this is what I want to do more than anything else right now, and that's what I'm going to do. And I guess it's probably a good thing that when those things that I've done like that have been peaceful activities. I guess that's one of those things I'm thankful for, because if I was somebody that really had a lot of impulses in a direction that were dangerous to me or to other people, then for the time I was doing that, I wouldn't have been able to be talked out of that either. I wouldn't have been able to, nothing would bust through that. So that's one of the things I'm thankful for, that when I tend to pursue climbing mountains because they're there, my mountains tend to be usually pretty short ones and ones that don't hurt anybody. And this was a really long part of this, so congratulations to anyone who got through it, but I was kind of on a roll in what I was talking about. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this one up, but I will continue in the next part on similar subject.